Hi everyone. Today let's talk about Fed Powell's testimony for tomorrow. Then we'll get into all the usual data and charts. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and hit the bell to help out the channel. And let's get started. So let's see what Jerome Powell has to say for tomorrow. At least potentially, we'll see what we think he's going to say. Market seems set for a little bit of a pullback on his comments, and I would assume that he's going to say things like, we're still looking at the data, we're still waiting to see more information on whether we're going to see cuts. And they mention it here, the past several months have definitely changed the market dynamic with the massive runs we've seen across markets. Definitely a lot of optimism in the economy and a handful of major stocks that are running pretty aggressively. And they mention here he's probably not going to give any outright answers to the rate cut decision, but there could be some nuances and things that he says that absolutely could affect markets. And they do mention the fact that we could see mixed signals, which could further complicate the issue. They've already told us that they're potentially doing 3 cuts of 0.25% each. And currently that's projected for June, realistically probably July. And we've talked about that on the channel before, but will there be any adjustments to that? Will we see any dovishness from Jerome Powell, or will he come in a little bit more hawkish off the back of the little bit sharper inflation data that we saw? PCE came in soft, but PPI as well as CPI was a little bit hotter, so mixed signals on inflation, and it is unlikely that he's going to deviate from that data-centric approach. And then from the political side, they do talk about the unemployment rate, which has ticked up a little bit, but really not nearly enough to start triggering some cuts. The economy has been very strong, the market has been very strong, and realistically there's no reason to cut rates at this point, but understand the fact that the market has already priced in some cuts, so if we see too much hawkishness, that could bring some more weakness into markets, especially on the back of the weakness that we saw today. Moving over to fear and greed, you can see we pulled back pretty significantly to a 74 from a 78. We are back into regular greed, which is interesting. Still extreme greed on most of the metrics. Pulling back here, you can see strength still hovering in extreme greed, breadth still trending up slightly, regular greed there. Put call ratio, no changes. We did see the VIX start to bounce higher a little bit. We talked about that setting up yesterday. And then safe haven demand stepping back into regular greed, so people buying up bonds. Saw an article today that people are buying bonds, trying to lock in those higher rates for the longer term, especially with cuts likely to come this year. Moving over to seasonality, you can see we were supposed to get a slight step up, about 0.5%. We did not. We did move much lower, about 2% lower on the NASDAQ, which really wasn't supposed to happen all the way up until about the 15th. So have we satisfied this move already with the move that we saw today? I think that's a little bit unlikely. We could see a bounce here, rally up into mid-March, and then a lower low towards that second half of March, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I think that move we saw today was more like this price action down to that -2%. Could look for a bounce over the next day or two, and then a lower low is set to come over that next week after next. Moving over to the calendar, today was supposed to be bullish. Obviously, it was not. We'll see if we get that bearish indicator on Friday. Neutral data here on the 6th and 7th. Moving over to the economic calendar, you can see ISM non-manufacturing employment coming in at 48, way below the 51.4 and in negative territory below that 50 line. Definitely not what you would want to see. Global services PMI came in pretty good, better than expected, as well as composite PMI still better than expected, but pretty interesting to see that non-manufacturing employment data coming in very weak. And you can see here non-manufacturing PMI and non-manufacturing prices also coming in below expectations, but at least they are still above that 50 line. And then tomorrow, don't forget, we have Jerome Powell, just like we talked about, as well as the JOLTS report, ADP non-farms coming in at 8:15. So tons of data tomorrow could absolutely push around markets. And then going into Thursday, we still have Jerome Powell speaking again, as well as the ECB interest rate decision. And that'll pretty much wrap it up for Thursday. Moving over to Max Payne, looks like it's down for today. Must be something up with the servers. Saw some servers down across Facebook, as well as Instagram and Meta as a whole, so this might be part of that. Otherwise, no data here for today. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the SPY, you can see we fell basically throughout the session until we hit that 200 SM, as well as that 505.08 level, and then we bounced into the end of the session, got up to VWAP as well as the 9 EMA, momentum slightly bullish here. It's falling now just a little bit at the end of the after hours. We'll see if that holds up, but otherwise, looking at the daily chart in terms of structure, this is still bullish. You can see we're well above that 21 EMA at 502.30. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish. So still showing that weakness, at least in the shorter time frames on the indicators. But in terms of structure, obviously everything is still straight up. Just a down day at 1% to the downside on the SPY. And then moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see we did end up breaking that 8 EMA, which was at 507.82. Next level is 502 to that midline right on top of the 21 EMA. MACD also bearish here on the volume weighted. Didn't quite hit that third ATR band before selling off, but we were definitely extended. So we're back into the middle of this range. Could absolutely be a move just like this where we see 2 more bullish days, a little bit of chop here potentially coming off of that 21. But if the 21 breaks, then you have 496.25, which is your 34 EMA on this chart. So that could be interesting, just something to watch for. Critical level being 502. Moving over to the NASDAQ, similar thesis. Strong selling throughout the day, hit that trend line. Thought that might hold. It did hold for a little bit on the shorter time frames. Ended up breaking down. Didn't quite hit that 433.24 level. Bounced a little bit from there. It's down a little bit after hours, but still holding above VWAP as well as the 9 EMA. We did see really strong results from CrowdStrike, so that's helping. And then here on the daily chart, you can see hit the 21, hit VWAP, almost touched that level, still holding this longer term trend on a closing basis. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, as well as the volume on that candle also not great. Moving over to the NASDAQ, similar thesis. You can see we pulled back right to that 21, ended up holding that level at 433.76 after tapping. You can see we did see a bit of a spike on volume, so that is not great. Let's go ahead and expand that out here just a little bit. This is the relative volume indicator, so you can see we did see a lot of selling on the day relatively. That was at a 1.31, so a big vol move on that. We didn't hit the 2 level, so it wasn't crazy selling, but typically when you see vol moves, there is a little bit more follow through. We haven't seen any volume on this previous hold, even that spike up here on the 1st, and then nothing on the 4th either, and now we saw a big volume on that selling, so pretty interesting. Keep that in mind. Might see a bit of a bounce and then some more selling tomorrow based on that volume. Moving over to the Mag 7, obviously it was a down day, 1.2%. It closed right on top of the trend line after touching the 9 EMA at 342.24. Momentum stepping down, RSI stepping down, breaking below the SMA. So short term, a little bit of bearish indicator. 21 sitting at 332.61. See if we can hit that level or not. That's right on top of VWAP as well. Those are pretty heavily correlated on this chart. So we'll see if that touches. We are up a little bit after hours, which is interesting. Still holding that trend. So that is currently sitting basically on top of current price, 344.50. Moving over to Apple and Tesla. Apple doing exactly what we thought it was going to. We talked about this 179.69 level being super important for a long time. Broke on Friday, massive sell-off Monday, massive sell-off Tuesday, 2.84%. Took out that 170.90 level. The price target is 165.71. We talked about that yesterday. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, super oversold, tons of selling volume. Everything on this says it's going lower. And then looking at Tesla, bearish day there as well, almost 4%. Low of day was 177.57, so it did touch my level at 177.70. Bounced from that level, it's back at these lows. Momentum rolling towards bearish, RSI looking weak. So at this point, I would expect a lower low, pushing down towards that 167.34 level. It is up a little bit after hours, but both of these look super weak. Moving over to the Apple chart here on Tasty, I just wanted to highlight this big selling volume here on February the 29th. Look at that big volume on the relative volume indicator. Well above that 2 level, all the way up to 4.25, so massive selling on that day. And then you can see we've had a massive follow through since then, and the volume on that is increasing. Volume weighted MACD selling off well below that third ATR band. Let's jump this here to the weekly chart just for a moment to see where we could be headed. So you have that longer term EMA sitting at 164.35, so right in that same area as the level, right as that lower trend there, as well as the lower ATR band sitting at 163.10. So that is what I'm looking for at this point. You still have a low going back to the end of October. Could bounce from that area, certainly possible, but realistically, that lower ATR band at 164.39. Moving over to AMD and NVDA. AMD was down just a little bit, 0.11, but it's up after hours to a 675, which would make it positive on the day. Bullish momentum. And then NVIDIA, another positive day. What can you say? At 0.85. Resistance still sitting all the way up around 893 or so. Momentum bullish, RSI bullish. Everything looks strong here on semis. Moving over to Netflix and Microsoft, you can see Netflix hit that trend line and rejected 2 bearish days in a row, 0.57 and 2.81%, back down to that 9 EMA right on top of it at 599.39. We're back above it, and we are back below that level after hours, so definitely some selling coming through. And similarly here on Microsoft, big selling, almost 3% to the downside. Took out the 9 and 21 as well as VWAP. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, big breakdowns. Next level, 394.24. You do have some trend support around 398.50 or so, but realistically, 55 EMA makes sense to me at 394.41. Moving over to staples and discretionary, staples is up 0.24%, so continuing this rotation into safer stocks. You had a bit of a stall there where we had staples going flat and discretionaries rallying, and now that has reversed after staples hit the price target at 185.36. Technically missed it by about 10 cents or so, but I'm calling that a hit. Touched the price target, and then we pulled right back to the next one, 180.10 and the 21 EMA. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish. We'll see if this level breaks. It is bouncing a little bit after hours, but critical point there, hit the resistance, pulled right back to support. We'll see what happens. Moving over to industrials and utilities. We've been talking about these for a bit now. A little bit of a flip here with industrials down 0.82%, back below the trend, gap to it, sold off, hit the 9 EMA. So still holding structure, but definitely showing some selling. This has happened before. You can see hit the 9, ended up going to higher levels, but a little bit of a pullback worth noting. And then utilities ended up down on the day after wicking all the way up to $64, almost hit the price target, rejected that 9 EMA and then sold off right to support at 62.59. It's below that by 1 penny. You can see some volume coming through on that. I still think this looks good at that level, 62.59. As long as that holds, should see some pushes to 64.20 and 65 potentially. I still like utilities, like I said. Holding a much higher low off of this previous base. Strong setup, looking okay still. Moving over to breadth, as you would expect, it was down quite a lot on the day. Engulfed the Monday session on both of these. Back below the 9 EMA, looking down to the 21 and the 55 in the 63 area. We'll see what happens. Momentum rolling over, RSI rolling over, so we might not get back into that 86.50 area. And then looking at the 50-day average, you can see big bearish candle, fully engulfed, back below 68.66, 9 EMA down at 65.63. Momentum stepping down, RSI still bullish, but breaking down pretty decently. The trend in terms of structure is still intact. We're above the 9, above the 21, still below the 55, but we did take out one support level, so that's slightly bearish. So continuing to watch this, nothing super convincing yet. Could be a short-term pullback. Moving over to the put-call ratio, you can see this did spike up a little bit. Got back above 1 on a closing basis, hit the trend here, if you can call it a trend. It's just something that I watch. Touched that level, pulled back a little bit. Didn't go super high, but it is interesting to see some more puts coming into the market as we saw a sell-off that has been not what we've been seeing. We did see calls entering the market on dips, which was that buy the dip reflex, but now we're seeing some puts come in. Could see this spike back up to 1.4, which could be interesting. And if we get any higher than that, up into this 1.6 to 1.7 range, that's typically where we start to see a bit of a reversal. You can actually see this has been building a little bit, headed a little bit higher on these lows. We obviously had that spike down on the 28th, but overall has been trending slightly higher on the put call ratio. Moving over to the dollar here on the hourly and the daily, tried to rally overnight, sold off massive at the open, bounced off of that 103.64 level. You can see candle close, candle open, still an important level, bounced to that 9 EMA and then sold off a little bit. Bearish on the day, 0.06, so still not moving a whole lot, still holding above that 200 SMA on a closing basis. Obviously, the candle's not quite closed yet. You got about 20 minutes left here, but it's probably going to hold that level. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, still nothing convincing on the dollar. Moving over to yields, these continued their sell-off after the slight bounce that we saw on the Monday session, so sold off more here today. 10 years spiking all the way down to 4.11. Which is interesting considering the fact that we saw stocks moving lower and yields moving lower. That's not typically the case. See what happens once we hit that 55 EMA down at 409. If that holds, that could be bullish. If it breaks here, 3.97 is your next level. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, and yields do look a little bit weaker. It is worth noting that the 2 year is still holding well above 4.5. Moving over to JNK and TLT, JNK still doing nothing. It has been absolutely abysmal, continuing to chop sideways, doing nothing. And then TLT, on the other hand, you can see massive gap higher, hit that 55 EMA at 95.62. We'll see if it can break to 96.50 or not. Momentum bullish, RSI bullish. We said it looked very strong after the trend break here. Still a strong candle on the Friday, looked a little bit weaker, but it was holding some levels here on Monday. And then we saw that continuation here today. So it all makes sense, continuing to look strong after this trend break here. And the structure, at least in the short term, is bullish. Moving over to volatility, move index going higher, makes sense. And then you have the VIX also moving higher, momentum ticking towards bullish. We saw the step down yesterday, thought that that could lead to continuation, and it did. Strong move higher, hit the trend here, momentum continuing in the same direction. RSI definitely bullish, got all the way up to 15 and then rejected a little bit down to 14.5. So right at these kind of wick highs where we saw previous halts. I would expect some continuation, but it might not happen immediately. We'll see how that plays out tomorrow. Moving over to my accounts, you can see I did change a lot of things. So I rolled down to 204 as the IWM closed at 203.61. You can see that's basically flat after hours. It was up a little bit, but still holding there. So looking for $1 on that position, that would give me up to 205 tomorrow. And then looking at the Qs, I ended up closing those shares pretty early in the session and then buying them back at the end of the day as we started to see that pop coming through. You can see after hours, we ended up bouncing pretty strongly up to 437.20 or 30, pulled back now to 436.80 or so. But when I bought those shares back, I ended up selling a 435 call. So that gave me plenty of protection here, $2.79. And we have that critical 433 area that I'm watching closely. If that area breaks down strongly tomorrow, I will be out of all of these positions. So looking to profit on these puts, I rolled on some puts instead of having the shares on. And then as we saw that end of day rally, I did put the shares back on as it looked okay, potentially into the open. So like I said, watching that area closely, 435 is the strike that's important to me. And then 433.50 or so is the important level on the charts. And then TQQs rolled this all the way down to 59. Also took off that put pretty early in the session, which worked out well. Looking for a $60.17 close there. So trying to make about another $1 on this position for the Friday session. I'm considering taking this off and using a long dated call strategy on the Qs so that I can do daily options. It is pretty capital intensive, but it might be worth it just based on the volatility we've seen on the Qs, and the TQQ position is kind of hard to manipulate because I only have those weekly options to work with. Let me know down in the comment section what you think of Jerome Powell's upcoming speech, or what you think of any of the charts. Will we see continued sell-off, or is this just a short-term pullback and we're going to see more rallies in tomorrow's session? Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.